The following video contains visuals of fake bodies from The Sims 4. This is a video game, and this account does not promote or endorse such behavior.
Daphne tended to her victory garden nervously. Unbeknownst to the rest of her family, she invited her father and Matthew's father for a visit. She didn't want to tell the rest of her family and risk ruining a happy reunion. She couldn't think about this day going wrong. She had waited for this day for over 25 years. She needed her one surviving parent in her life. Atticus and Tommy arrived at the Barton residence. It was a nerve-wracking day for them both. They had envisioned what a reunion with their children would be like for years. It was something they always wanted. Daphne greeted her father-in-law with a hug. She thought that Matthew definitely took after his mother and had his father's kindness. Betsy was overjoyed to meet her grandpa. Up until today, she had 0 grandfathers, and now she magically had 2. She loved her family and was always happy to invite more family into her life. The reunion went well. Daphne was open to having both her father and her father's lover in her life. She knew that this was the best it would get, as Anna and Matthew were currently out of the home. She basked in the feeling of her daddy back in her life, and her daughters having 2 grandfathers for the first time in their lives. Charlene warmed to Atticus immediately. They were both soft-spoken and gentle. They got along well. Betsy was more standoffish with Tommy because of the stories her father told. She chose not to believe them because he was nice to her. Betsy and Atticus talked about their lives. Atticus wanted to know everything about his grandchildren. He had missed out on pivotal years of his children's lives that he would not miss out on his grandkids' lives. And got home from school and was confused as to who was in their home. Atticus explained that he was the father that she never knew, and became very angry and began to lash out at Atticus. She blamed him for what happened to her mother and for all of the pain and suffering her family had been through. Atticus was hurt that he was immediately met with hostility. He understood why and felt this way, but hoped he could develop some kind of relationship with her. And snuck outside and stole one of Daphne's ciggies. This situation with her biological father had sent her over the edge. She was beyond angry with her sister for inviting such a vile man back into their lives. Their family was doing just fine without those 2. She wished they would crawl back into whatever hole they escaped from. Atticus went outside to once again try to talk to his youngest daughter. Instead, he caught her hitting a ciggy. He reprimanded her for taking up the habit so early and begged her to stop, and screamed at Atticus to leave her alone. He didn't even know she existed before, and he had no right to dictate what she did. His opinion meant nothing to her, and did not know what came over her. Every time she looked at her father's face, she saw her mother's suffering. She slapped Atticus across the face. The action shocked both of them. Atticus retreated inside and then resigned herself to feel the hurt of having her father in her home. She sobbed uncontrollably. It wasn't fair that he was here and wreaking havoc on their family. She was better off without he or Tommy in her life. Matthew returned home shortly after and was shocked to see his father sitting on the couch in his living room. Anger brewed within him as he remembered how much his mother struggled after his father left. Matthew began to yell at his father for abandoning their family. Tommy got defensive because he only ever wanted to be free and unapologetically himself. Matthew would not accept this. He didn't care that his father was gay. He cared that he left Lucy to raise 2 children in poverty. Tommy continued to try and justify his actions, but Matthew wouldn't hear a word of it. He said that Tommy ruined his mother's life and he would never forgive him. He claimed that he lost his father a long time ago and did not want him back. Matthew banished Tommy from his home and told him to never return. Daphne hated how their reunion had gone and went outside to see her father and Tommy off. She hugged her father close and told him she loved him. She also hugged Tommy, despite all they had been through. She was happy that her father found true love. She hoped Matthew would forgive him someday. She told Tommy that she would try to talk to her husband and wish them well. She watched her father and Matthew's father walk away and felt so sad to be losing them again, even just for a little while. To try to calm his nerves, Matthew fixed all of the appliances in the house. Admittedly, he intentionally broke a few out of anger, and it felt good to be useful in his household. He could not believe his father's audacity for trying to come back into his life with a half-thought apology. He was even more angry with his wife. She knew how hard he had taken the news of his father's whereabouts, but she didn't listen to him. Daphne relied heavily on her sickies. She thought that she had done the right thing by bringing her father and Tommy back into their lives, but her family was furious with her. After so much heartache and loss they experienced, she thought this was just what her family needed. She now knew that she was so wrong and didn't know how to make it better. To climax to Matthew's anger, Daphne erupted a few weeks after their fathers visited. He could not contain his feelings of betrayal any longer. He told her that she was inconsiderate and what she did was insensitive to both he and Anne. Daphne argued that she did the right thing because both he and Anne needed to work through their emotions regarding their fathers. She should have informed them of their father's visit, but she did not regret allowing them a chance to be part of their family again. Matthew argued that they did not deserve a second chance at being in their family because they walked out the first time without a care in the world for anyone but themselves. Matthew demanded that his wife sleep on the couch for the time being. He was so angry with her that he couldn't look at her. He tried to subside his anger by knitting. He was exhausted and unsure if he could get over this. Daphne felt so defeated by this whole ordeal. She did not regret inviting her father back into her life. It was something she had dreamed about for many years. She understood that this decision affected the other people in her life who she loved. She prayed that she could have them all and not have to choose between them. All she ever wanted was to have a big and happy family full of love. She was starting to think it was impossible. Anne's life began to derail after the chance encounter with her father. Her grades began to slip, and she dropped out of the theatre club she was in at school. She was struggling to contain her anger at her sister for doing this to her. Daphne and Anne relied heavily on ciggies during those weeks after Atticus. Yet Daphne was unaware of her sister's habit and had been stealing them from Daphne or getting them from Freddie. She had lost all respect for her sister during the last weeks. Their family dynamic became a difficult one. Their once warm and loving relationship turned cold and hateful. Daphne took much of the hurtful words her sister said in stride. Anne argued with Daphne every chance she got. She told her that she would have been better off in an orphanage than to be in her care. She didn't even mean what she said. She was simply too angry to contain her words. Still, Daphne said nothing and let her sister trash her, and wanted to get a rise out of her sister, so she finally disclosed that she knew the secret of Betsy's paternity. She called her sister a floozy. Finally, Daphne had enough of her Anne's abuse. She screamed at her baby sister and told her she was ungrateful. She and Matthew sacrificed years of their lives to make sure that Anne was loved and cared for. She told her sister if she didn't like her living situation, she was more than welcome to leave. It would be one less mouth to feed. And decided that this was the best thing for her right now, to be away from her sister. Anne hastily packed her bags, everything that was important to her in this house. She put in one little suitcase. She began to feel regret for hurting her sister's feelings and saying she would move out, but it was too late to apologize. Anne's two favorite girls rushed outside to try to beg her to stay. To no avail. She hugged her little Charlene and felt such guilt that she would miss watching her grow up. She promised to always be the best big sister to those girls. Betsy was angry with them for leaving her but gave her a hug anyway. and was her favorite person, and she was out of her mind with grief to be losing her, and would not tell her sisters where she was going in fear that they would tell their parents. She was nearly an adult and had to take care of herself now, and ran away from home to live with her boyfriend, Freddie. He had recently aged into a young adult and purchased a modest home to live in, and would be okay, and felt safe with Freddie. Daphne was absolutely devastated that had moved out of their home. She loved her baby sister so much, and now she could not keep her safe. She felt like she failed their mother. They looked for her for weeks, but found no trace of her. She had dropped out of school and left no forwarding address. Matthew focused on making sure his children were okay in the light of Anne's relocation. He blamed Daphne for what happened. If she hadn't brought Atticus and Tommy back into their lives, Anne would still be there. The girls were racked with sadness that their sister was no longer living with them. All he could do was love them and try to get them through this. To add to the family's terrible year, Daphne was later diagnosed with diabetes. It was a shock to their entire family, and they didn't know how this would affect the rest of Betsy's life. Betsy tried to keep her condition under control by staying hydrated. Her parents erred on the side of caution, so she wasn't allowed to join any sports. She felt like she was being punished even though she did nothing wrong. Betsy found a loophole to her parents' strict rules. Anne's old ballet beam was still in her old room, so she snuck in and taught herself how to dance. It was a source of comfort for her during this time. She felt close to him when she danced, and also felt healthier when she was exerting her body. She thought her parents were wrong for restricting what she could do. She was destined for more than this. Matthew had started focusing all of his energy on Charlene. She seemed to be taking Anne's departure the hardest and needed extra love. Matthew turned this into a positive by teaching her how to talk so she could better express her emotions. Betsy's parents suggested that Betsy join after-school activities so she wasn't so depressed. Her options were extremely limited because she could not join a sport, so she decided to be a part of a Miss IC class. She enjoyed music, but wasn't necessarily passionate about it. She hoped that joining the class would give her the opportunity to be great at something. Her instrument of choice was the violin. Betsy felt isolated after her diagnosis. She wasn't permitted to go to friends' houses, so she spent every waking moment in her home. She drew and painted pictures but felt stir-crazy. Her academics were a struggle for her. She excelled in English, but mathematics was difficult for her. Her teacher explained that her brain worked differently with numbers, which was why she struggled so fiercely in that subject. She was given a tutor in grade school and would need more help once she reached high school. Matthew started to feel more passionate about his career in law. He was able to bring some of his work home with him, such as typing up reports, and that helped because he was at home more often with his family. He felt like he was making a difference in other people's lives, and that excited him. Daphne had been feeling under the weather for some weeks. She figured she was battling some kind of flu, and she spent days at a time in bed. The only time she would get out of bed was to play dolls with her little Charlene. The doll family had 5 members, just like how their family used to, and that made Daphne sad. Weeks passed and her illness was getting worse. She felt terrible all the time. She realized that it could be something more serious when she passed out. She was out cold for several minutes. Daphne would soon find out that she had an aggressive form of lung cancer. She and her family's lives were about to change forever. After Daphne came to, she knew she was sicker than she had previously let herself believe. She needed medical attention so she could be treated and be able to live a long and happy life with her family. Daphne's medical diagnosis had brought her husband back to her. Matthew realized that he had lost precious time with his wife by being so angry with her. She was right. There was nothing more important than family. Matthew was strong for Daphne when he was next to her, but often excused himself to weep. What if he lost the love of his life? Daphne tried to maintain some sense of normalcy after her cancer diagnosis. She still made at least one meal a day for her family. She had to remain strong for them. They were scared and didn't want to lose her. Even if the cancer would take her, she wanted to give her family all she could in the time she had left. She owed it to them to fight for her life. Charlene did not quite understand what was happening to her mummy. She saw she was down, so she liked to tell her jokes and stories to lift her spirits. Daphne's little girl did help her feel better. She hoped Charlene never lost her endless sense of optimism. Daphne broke down whenever she was alone. She cursed into the air and questioned why the world was so cruel. Part of her felt like this was her punishment for being with Norman. All of her deception and internalization of guilt had taken a toll on her body. Charlene's birthday came a few months later. She put on some of her mummy's makeup to be pretty like she was. She was sad about growing older and was scared to start school. Despite her doctor's urging to stop the ciggies, Daphne still had one on occasion. They helped clear her mind from all of the chaos. She sat at the kitchen table before Charlene's birthday celebration began and wondered if this was the last birthday of one of her children as she would be present for. The thought devastated her. Her whole life had been being a mother. What would her kids do without her? Daphne put on a brave face. She held her youngest child and helped her to age into her next phase of life. Charlene wished for her mummy to be happy again. Charlene's childhood trait was that she is cunning. Her childhood aspiration is to be a social butterfly. Daphne doted on her youngest baby in the weeks following her birthday. She could not believe that Charlene was so big. She was beautiful and intelligent and a perfect mix of she and Matthew. Now that Charlene was a child, she understood the severity of her mother's diagnosis, and it deeply upset her. She felt powerless to help her mother or give her any sort of relief. Daphne was depressed and felt hopeless about her situation. Some days she just wanted to pass over to save her family from the prolonged hurt of her health deteriorating. She wanted to be strong, but some days she felt bad for herself and wallowed in self-pity. Those were her hardest days, and she couldn't see herself ever getting better. Charlene did her best in school. She found it difficult to concentrate on anything other than her mother. She found homework meaningless when she could be spending that time with her sick mom. Daphne noticed her daughter's struggle and gave her words of wisdom. She told her youngest that her parents would not be on this earth forever. School might not seem important at the moment, but sticking with it was important for her future. She told her daughter the same thing she told her sweetheart. The world was her oyster, and she could be anything she set her mind to. Matthew received the devastating news that his dear mother, Lucy, had passed away in her sleep. She had terrible health complications ever since her factory accident that took her sight. She was finally at peace. His sister, Elizabeth, came to stay at the Bartons' residence. She brought her son, Henry, along. She would have an extended stay both to grieve her mother and help take care of her nieces as Daphne's health continued to deteriorate. Daphne was very happy to see her sister-in-law and relieved to have her staying with them. She needed help but was too prideful to ask for it. Elizabeth solved that problem by being there. Daphne continued to have episodes of losing consciousness. As devastating as it was to witness, her loved ones had gotten used to it. The episode would pass and she would come to. It was their new normal. Elizabeth and Henry stayed in the basement of the Barton home. To her, it felt like their family was falling apart at the seams, and she was deeply overwhelmed. She tried to hold it together for her child. She laid in bed night after night and begged God to save her sister-in-law. Her brother had already lost their mother. It would break him if they lost Daphne too. She agreed to stay as long as they needed her because this was such a difficult time for them all. As Daphne's condition worsened, she felt very angry with the world. She had so much life left to live and so much more she wanted to see. She wanted to grow old with the love of her life. She wanted to watch her daughters get married and have children. It was beginning to look like she wouldn't get the chance to do any of that. Charlene played with her dolls as a distraction from all of the sadness in their household. Her dolls were her family, and it was a magical universe where nobody got sick or passed away. At least her family's life in doll form was happy. It brought her comfort. Elizabeth eventually took over cooking for the family. Daphne was too weak to be helpful to her family anymore. Elizabeth was happy to help. She saw how badly her family was suffering and wanted to be useful to them. Charlene became her little helper. She felt useless with idle hands. She wasn't much of a junior chef but could set a beautiful table setting. Life felt strange with her mother being sick. Her mother had always been on the go and optimistic. She wanted to be that for her mother. Many of the dinners as of late were without Daphne. She didn't have much of an appetite anymore. She tried to join her family at least once a week because this is where their family felt closest. She tried to eat the food Elizabeth had prepared and tried to keep her strong and happy demeanor, but it was becoming increasingly more difficult. Her girls were smart and knew that she was only pretending. Still, she asked about school and friends they have made. It was her obligation as a mother to still be there for them until she couldn't. Even Matthew's endless sunshine and light began to dull as he watched his wife get sicker. The dinners that used to be a lively and happy affair now felt sour and full of sadness. The girls still savored each dinner with their mother because they didn't know when a dinner would be the last. Neither they ever got. Elizabeth was there for her nieces as much as she could be. She was especially close with Charlene, who needed comfort the most. Daphne's sense of hope decreased month after month and only getting sicker. She had so many dreams that would never become a reality, and that was difficult to come to terms with. Daphne's last chance at getting better came after her doctor informed her that there was a new and experimental surgery that was being used to treat her form of cancer. She didn't have much fight left in her, but she agreed to the surgery for Matthew and her girls. She walked into surgery that day and conjured the last ounce of hope she had in her. This surgery had to work, and she had to stay alive for her family. Matthew could not stand to be inside the hospital during the long surgery. He was antsy with nerves. The fresh air helped to calm him. He didn't know what to do if the surgery failed. His wife was like an extension of his heart, and he didn't think he could survive without her. The surgery took several hours. Daphne had dreams of her children all grown up with husbands and children of their own. Her husband was grey and old by her side, and returned home with a man who truly loved her. She wanted so badly to be there for all of these things. Daphne and Matthew returned to the hospital a week later to get the results of her surgery back. After the dreams she had while in surgery, she was sure that it had been successful. She was going to be okay. Matthew was not as optimistic as his wife. He was hopeful, but had a gut feeling that the surgery did not work, and he would soon lose the love of his life to this illness. Much to Daphne's shock and devastation, the surgery was not successful. This illness would not get better and would soon take her life. The doctor told Matthew to make her comfortable. She had anywhere from a few weeks to a year. Time was running out for Daphne. Daphne's family stood in the rain as she returned home, and all hope was lost to the Bartons. Their loved one would soon cease to exist, and they needed to prepare to say their goodbyes. Daphne savored every moment that she was still breathing. She often warmed herself by the fire and prayed. She prayed for her family to heal from her loss and to still live their lives to the fullest extent. Although she was terrified for what was to come for her family, she found a sense of peace about passing over. Everything came to a halt when Daphne fell unconscious and could not be woken. She had not passed, but the doctor determined that she was in a deep sleep. Her body was preparing for the end. Matthew called all of their family and friends to say their goodbyes. Elizabeth told her sister-in-law how grateful she was to have her in her life for many years. She was thankful that Matthew had such a beautiful love story with her. Matthew also called Norman against his better judgment. Norman sat with Daphne for a long time. He told her that he never stopped loving Daphne, and that month with her was the best month of his entire life. No woman had compared to her, and that is why he never married. He promised to look after their daughter, even if only from afar. He would provide anything she needed and make sure she was happy. She would be taken care of so she didn't need to worry. Robert was a man of few words, but told his sister how much he loved her and appreciated everything she did for their family. Their baby sister had a life full of love because of her kindness. Edward talked to his sister for hours. He detailed every instance from his childhood that he could remember that was made better because of Daphne. He apologized for seldom coming to visit and noted it was now the biggest regret of his life. He told her that their mother would be so proud of her and the life she created for herself. He told her that it brought him comfort that she would soon be reunited with their mother. Atticus held his little girl. He had many regrets in his life, but the biggest was leaving her behind. He missed out on so much of Daphne's life, and their reunion was cut so short because of this illness. He savored holding Daphne in his arms, and he was reminded of the small newborn he held in his arms all those years ago. He expressed how much he loved her from that first moment. Tommy apologized for being the reason that she experienced so much sadness at such a young age. He was plagued with guilt over Daphne and Atticus's close bond that he stole from her. He thanked Daphne for loving his son and was so happy that the two found each other and had more time than most to love each other. June and Lily traveled to Willow Creek to say their goodbyes. June thanked her friend for always reminding her to look on the bright side, no matter how hopeless life seemed. Lily thanked Daphne for being there for her after the accident in Windenburg. She wanted Daphne to know that because of her gentle care with her during that time, she was able to heal and create a life for herself. She would forever be grateful to have Daphne as her closest friend. Daphne had small bursts of energy. During those times, Charlene would come into her room and sing to her to try and cheer her up. Although it did lift her spirits, it also made her sad that she didn't have much time left to listen to her beautiful voice. Betsy liked to sneak into her mother's bedroom in the middle of the night. She told her mama all of her secrets. She didn't want to have anything left unsaid when her mother succumbed to her illness. She reminded her every night that she was the best mother in the world. This admission woke Daphne from her deep sleep. She told her firstborn child that she needed to tell her something that she had kept a secret her entire life. She moved to sit on the side of the bed next to her darling Betsy. She started speaking in a nonsensical way, as if trying to formulate how to word her big reveal. Betsy begged her mother to tell her she would soon age into a teenager so she could handle whatever her mother needed to disclose. Daphne told her daughter that even though Matthew is and always will be her father, he was not the man that shared Betsy's DNA. She told her of the war and of her biological father, Norman. Betsy sat in the chair for a long time after her mother fell into another deep sleep and wept. She felt like her entire life was a lie. Her mother had loved someone other than her father. She remembered her mother's friend who had visited her when she was a toddler. She remembered the instant connection she felt with him. Was that her real father? Betsy snuck outside that night to listen to the rain fall and get her thoughts in order. She played with her toy and realized that her mother's revelation did not change how she felt about her father. He would always be her dad. She wanted to get to know her biological father more. He was 50% of her DNA and wanted a relationship with him too.